Thank you very much, and it's a great honor to be here and to talk to 1,000 people who care about cities. I wish we could do that in London. What I'm going to do is share the platform with Peter Bishop and talk about really the big issues which face our city. And I'm going to immediately respond, Francis, to your question, and I'm going to come back at the end. What are the 5 or 6 really important things which architects today in London need to really worry about or care about? First of all, in whatever we do to change the city, we need to maintain its multicultural DNA. I think one of the risks of any intervention, including the Grand Pari that you are doing, is that you neutralize the extraordinary qualities that a city has. In London, we have to create higher density mixed areas in areas across the city that I will show you. We need to bring families back into the center. What has happened, and probably you will recognize this, is that many children, many families have been leaving the city, particularly white middle-class families. This is an architectural problem, not just a social problem. We need to create a new piece of city in the poor part of London, which is the east, and we are using the Olympics as an excuse, purely as an excuse, not to win medals, but to win the city in many ways. And finally, I think we have to rediscover one of our most fantastic resources, which is the River Thames. But let me start just by standing back a bit. We are very much part of an international debate. As has already been said today, this is an international confrontation. And I think it's important that if you look at this view of Europe at night, you see how Paris stands out. You will recognize Paris as a sort of lonely star in many ways in the middle of a relatively empty country. And that says a lot about the importance of your city in relation to the rest. You can begin to see Berlin, you can see all the lights in the Randstad, which we will hear before. But maybe surprising to you, as it is to me, that London and the southeast of England, the one closest to continental Europe, is actually very, very densely built and habitated by human beings. So the question becomes, how does one plan, manage, and intervene in a city of this sort? It's interesting just to compare, in scale, London and Ile-de-France. London actually, Francis, is just over 7 million people, but it's managed by one mayor. And I think that's a very clear message. It's also a very large economy. The whole of this part of the southeast of England is the equivalent to Saudi Arabia as an economy. So it's like a nation state. And I think decisions that need to be made about it need to be considered in that light. It's also a city which has never had a plan. That's very, very important. It never had walls. It never had housemen. In fact, when Christopher Wren, a great architect from the 17th century, tried to redesign the city à la Paris, in fact, as he used those terms, after the Great Fire, it was totally ignored by the people who were in charge. And the only plan we have, but a very important plan, is the green belt, the idea that the city cannot expand beyond a certain limit. And I think that still today, as you've heard from the Rogers presentation today, is a key element. I worked with Richard Rogers and others on something called the Urban Task Force, which really tried to say, how can we make our cities more livable again by making them more dense? And the darker blue color you see on this map is denser places next to good transport. And what is interesting, it looks like a very abstract, nearly ideal city, something we don't recognize. But actually, if you look at this mess, and this is London, an aerial view of London, it's what happens underneath the surface. If you have an aerial view of Paris, it's elegant, it's organized, particularly, of course, in the center. Barcelona is similar. Many of the 19th century interventions are very, very clear in terms of the structure. London is not like that and gives, I think, a lot of interesting opportunities. There are parts of it which compete with the extraordinary landscape that you have here, but these are all private developments done by very rich landlords about 200 years ago. And it's difficult to imagine this. They still are private developments owned by very rich landlords who own the freehold, the territory on which they are. These parks belong only to the people who have a key who can go inside. I'm not saying this is a good model, this is a reality. Most of London is like this, 2- or 3-story houses. These are our banlieue. We have very different problems to yours. But probably the most important thing in response to what happens in London is this area here, and I'm going to spend a few minutes on that, which is the future of the Thames Gateway, the poorer area on the east of London, and what happens along the Thames. But importantly, to discuss cities, as we heard this morning, we need to understand some basic facts. London, unlike Paris, is growing. And it's not growing like São Paulo, it's not growing like Shanghai, but it's actually growing with nearly 800,000 more people moving in up until the year 216. Even with recent trends in the global economy, these numbers apparently are still there. This means 400,000 new homes built in a city which seems full, but it isn't. It's a very multicultural city. It has a greater mix probably than this city. And in fact, interestingly, over 90% of people who moved to London in the last 10 years were born outside the UK. So we have a very, very mixed group. And that's why I stress that creating a city which is multicultural must remain at the heart of our agenda. The big decision, and Peter will talk about this in a moment, taken by the Mayor Ken Livingstone about 8 years ago, is that all this growth, all of it, needs to be contained within the boundaries of the city. That's a very clear, rather provocative statement. And this is what has led to this diagram called the London Plan. We don't have time to go into it, but it's important that you can have one description of what a city might be like in the future. And all you see here is the black line around the edge, outside of which the city cannot grow, and those 2 corridors in pink going east and northeast, which is where the city instead is going to grow and where there is a large amount of different available land. Now, we had one mayor up until last year, for whom I worked, who wanted the maximum. He got kicked out, unfortunately, not only because of that. And now we have a new mayor who doesn't apparently want the maximum. So it's an interesting question for us architects, us planners and urbanists. How do we deal with this sort of situation when politicians come and go and we sort of stay there? Well, one thing is to talk about density, just like Vinnie Mas was talking about before. Just look at these examples. All they show across this slide is the relative density. That means how many people live close together in Paris, London, Berlin, New York, and Shanghai on the right. And you can see that London is by far the least dense, the most dispersed city of all. So I think we have enormous capacity for growth. And right in the center, very close in this area, you see large areas which are ex-industrial areas, which are the opportunity for development. So many of these areas, railway areas, are now beginning to be developed. Some of them are the place where there is a location of tall buildings, such as Renzo Piano's Shard. Some of them are good, and some of them, like these, by other architects, usually American, I have to say, are bad. Now, the question is, where are we going to grow, and what is going to change? Well, the happy news for us is that the major growth will happen in the corridor between Paris and London, which is what we call the Thames Gateway. It's that area in brown, which you see going from that central red dot all the way going east. Just out of interest, that area is as big as 2 Amsterdams put together. So we're talking about a very large area. So these numbers of 400,000 people can certainly fit in. This shows, in the darker color, where people who are socially deprived live today. And it's very simple. The poorer areas are in the east. You see that dip in the river, which is called the Isle of Dogs. Remember that for a moment. Because in this map, which shows transport, and in purple and red you see good transport, and in blue you see bad transport in terms of public transport, you see that the east of London is poorly served by public transport. So, and we'll hear more about this in a moment, a lot of investment is going into improving the transport, a big issue, I think, which relates here, putting it exactly in those areas which are most socially deprived. So there have been amazing transformations of areas like Docklands from that to that. It's not wonderful, but it's a big change in terms of the scale and density of development, but it's a ghetto. It's an office ghetto. But this is much better, I have to say, than this, which is what is built everywhere else. And this is the danger for us, to leave cities to developers to do what they want to do. Now, as many of you know in this city, by mistake, we won the Olympics. And the Olympics is happening where the red line is, right in the middle of this hot area of potential. Peter will talk more about this in a moment, but this is what the area looks like. Today, most of it has been cleared up, and there will be a beautiful park in the middle of it. There will be one or two rather nice buildings, one by Zaha Hadid, etc. But the most important thing is this, and this is where I want to end. We're thinking of the Olympics as an excuse. I said this at the beginning. There will be a series of events, I won't go through the plan here, which have nearly 20 or 30 different stadia built there. Only 4 of them will actually remain. And what you see, just going back a moment, you see where all the orange pieces and red pieces are. After the Olympics, in 2013, you have lots of white areas. Those white areas are now being master planned by Peter's group to become a piece of city over the next 20, 25 years. This will begin to actually change the fabric of the city in East London in ways that has actually never happened before. So this is very much where I would say, Francis, our future lies and where we need to intervene. And this is why, in summarizing the key issues I've talked about, one has to keep the grain of the city, literally it's its organic and social grain, very diverse. One has to create higher density where it's needed, where there is public transport. One has to bring people and children back into the center and therefore put good, affordable schools. And one needs to use the excuses of events, like mega events, like Olympics or world exhibitions, to actually do much more and rebalance the city for the future. Thank you very much.
Merci Ricky Burnett. On retiendra quand même que, contrairement à la ville de Barcelone, pour les Jeux Olympiques de 92, vous n'avez pas saisi les Jeux Olympiques comme une chance, mais comme un prétexte. C'est quand même assez extraordinaire de voir le changement de terminologie, et puis peut-être que vous n'aviez évidemment pas la même situation, vous n'avez pas besoin de reconquérir la mer, et on sent bien que votre stratégie, dans un rééquilibrage énorme vers l'Est, cette stratégie d'estuaire sur 80 km et sur les 2 rives. Mais enfin, quand même, je note au passage que l'excuse, le prétexte, devient une opportunité pour faire la ville. Et ça, c'est quand même une belle leçon. Peter Bishop, vous êtes évidemment aux manettes, on pourrait dire, puisque vous êtes le directeur du Design for London. Quelle responsabilité! On a bien noté dans la proposition, dans le grand projet de Richard Rogers, son insistance sur la question de l'esthétique. C'est beaucoup de projets sur le Grand Paris nous renvoient à la question de la poétique, et peut-être que l'un de ceux qui appuie le plus sur la question esthétique est l'équipe Rogers, en disant que l'espace public doit regagner un statut noble, bien sûr, mais même esthétique, alors que c'était un mot quasiment banni. Évidemment, la rue, la rendre belle, tout ça, on ne pouvait plus en parler à un moment. Donc voilà, je vous laisse la parole, Monsieur Bishop, parce que j'imagine que sur ces stratégies dans la ville et en dehors de la ville, eh bien, la question de l'esthétique est peut-être le fil conducteur.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. I'm going to show you 3 different pictures of London to start with. This is 1947 plan for London, when architects still used watercolours and paints to describe their cities. A very beautiful picture which celebrates the diversity of London's districts. This is looking at London as a cosmopolitan city. A city where a definition of a Londoner in our terms, is purely somebody who lives in London, and a city which has developed a role very much as a centre of the world economy and as world cultures. And finally, this is a graphic we produced for an exhibition to describe how London is governed. It's not meant to make it easier. What it shows is that London is an incredibly complex city. Despite the fact we have one mayor, the governance is fractured, and it leads us to see our role in Design for London almost as brokers, as negotiators, or as pilots to take people through this incredibly complex mechanism. And it leads us to an approach to urbanism, where we define it as find some big ideas and then find lots of little ways to start implementing them. And I'm going to talk about 5 big ideas which are shaping our thinking at the moment. And the idea is common to all cities. All we have to solve as urban practitioners is transport, housing, the environment, public space, and regeneration. And I'm going to try and give you one idea for each. The first is to look at ways in which we can use the development potential and harness it with the transport networks. Ricky has already shown this picture, the London growth corridors towards the River Thames and towards Stansted Airport. And these coincide with the areas of the greatest development potential. And we're working here to work with the private sector. Our investment is private sector driven to try and shape this development and harness the regeneration potential of it. And to do that, Design for London has the role for the mayor of master planning. And I think our approach to master planning is quite different from what I call the French or the Dutch model. It is very, very light touch. All we try and do in our master planning is to just try and understand and explain how areas work and develop simple frameworks to guide the developments that can happen. The next area which we're now looking at, despite those 2 growth corridors, is the importance in which we can unlock the potential of outer London, of the London suburbs, and in particular the town centres as the essential building blocks that make a city a human and a civilized place. Those town centres, those shopping areas, those centres for communities. And we've just set up a commission to look at outer London and its relationship to the centre. And then there's the importance of utilising the new transport investment. And more important to us than the Olympics is the building of a new cross rail, an underground rail link, which will link Heathrow Airport in the west to Canary Wharf to the City of London and out to the east. And this will have a profound effect on the development geography of London. And here we are beginning to work, although this will not be finished before 2017, 9 years, we are already working here on each of the stations to begin to understand what happens a kilometre around those new transport stations to integrate the urban fabric and the communities with the new transport opportunities. And this is a piece of work which we've just completed. This is, you may recognise this as Oxford Street and Centre Point, a very famous London building of the 1960s. A piece of city that doesn't work because of its medieval street patterns and because of the interventions in the 1960s is also in different private ownerships. But here we, purely by agreement, with no power behind this, we persuaded each of the owners of those sites to work with us, and the architects are Terry Farrell, just to produce an idea, a vision. This is not a plan, it's only a concept which will shape the way in which those investment decisions happen. And this will never be built, and that's not important. What is important is the dialogue we've started and the fact that these landowners now understand the potential and the mutual advantage of working together. On a smaller scale, and I mentioned the importance of town centres as the focus points of civic life, this is work we're doing in one of the town centres, in Woolwich, in East London, where it has been, the connection has been severed between the town centre and the river by major roads and by major industrial uses. And here, after a detailed planning study, this is master planning and this is detailed design. We're working with, in this case, Williford Watson Mann, architectural practice, and with Gustafsson Porter, to use public space as the mechanism to stitch back together this part of the city and make the town centre work and connect it. And this is work which is now at the final design stage, and we should be starting on site later on this year. The second proposition is around housing and making sure we can house the growth of London in far more civilized manners than we managed to do in the 1960s. And the difference, I think, between Paris and London is that these estates, these mistakes of the past, are embedded in the fabric of the centre of London. And it's not just in the 1960s, even in the 1990s, we were producing this kind of rubbish. And we now have to retrogressively design this back into our city and try and produce housing and almost a new vernacular for London. And we're becoming quite interested in the idea of developing new housing styles, of redefine the London terrace in a way which is entirely contemporary, rather than borrowing on old styles, but understanding what vernacular means in a city like London. And to do this is a piece of work we will be publishing in about a month's time, looking at rethinking the very standards upon which we build our housing, around space standards, around aspect, around daylight, around open space and neighbourhood. The third proposition is around maintaining what's unique about London. In a world where we can commission our architects and our materials globally, maintaining the uniqueness of a city is of vital importance. We have an awful lot that we can learn, I think, especially from Paris in terms of public space. We're beginning to create some good public spaces in London, but this is still a battle which we have to win politically to persuade our politicians that these are more important than building new roads. Reinvesting in the London parks are one of the great assets that determine some part of the character of London. And building on some of the successes we've had. This is the Norman Foster redesign of Trafalgar Square. And this is a scheme which Design for London completed with Gross Max as the architects, looking at the space by the River Thames just opposite the Tower of London. And this is a scheme with Dixon Jones, which we've completed the design. We should be on site during the course of next year to transform Exhibition Road between the great museums in South Kensington into a pedestrian-friendly place where the road will be shared with cars. Not a radical idea, but very radical for London. And create a space where the pedestrian dominates and turn a street that at the moment is a car park into a place which is civilized and connects the institutions in one of the great world-class tourist sites we have in London. And also looking at the small-scale interventions. I talked about big ideas and small actions. And dealing with these kind of problems and persuading engineers that you can produce very, very simple solutions to streets is in many ways as important as the big-scale interventions we can carry out in terms of urban landscaping. The next proposition is to pick up what Ricky said about the Olympics and how we build on the legacy and the regeneration of the Olympics. This is the site with the red star showing how the Olympics sits in the blue areas, which is the areas of the highest levels of social deprivation. And this is a lovely graphic that Case Christensen and KCAP produced for us that said the challenge is to move from the Olympics on the left, which is an enclosed event, into a piece of city that engages and is open. And to create what we're beginning to call an urban mosaic, a new district of London, in one of the poorest areas of London. And this is now taking up from the place where Ricky finished. This is the beginning of the design as to what the Olympics will look like in about 2020. We've become quite interested in looking a lot further than that. And we've just completed 6 master plans around the Olympic district. And again, these are not conventional master plans. What we're asking from these master plans is for each of them to find 30 small projects which we can implement very easily. But the sum of those 30 projects will transform the neighborhoods and make the key connectivity between deprived neighborhoods and the economic engine for regeneration of the Olympics. And I'll just show you one of them. This is the River Lee. You can see the area of London on the right, as if a piece of fabric has been torn apart. And this is the Lower Lee, an area of industry, of heavy transport links and pollution. And we're beginning to rethink and replan this around various themes to create an integrated new district of London. And this is a piece of work we've just finished with a small architectural practice called Fifth Studio. And before the Olympics opens in 2012, we will have completed this. This is a new park to link the river right the way through to the Olympics, using the existing landscapes and knitting them together with a new walkway, which will finish on the Thames with a new park linked in with river services. And the final proposition is around the environment. And the importance now, it's absolutely in the centre of our urban agenda, is how we link environmental performance and our response to climate change in with our urban strategies. The first idea is around using existing green space. And this is an idea we call the East London Green Grid. I think it was inspired by the work of Peter Latz at the Emmersher Park in the Ruhr, where you can take existing landscapes and you can just manage them, you can enhance them, you can make little links and produce a network that provides the framework for neighbourhoods which will be sustainable for the future. You can then translate these in a very London and a very pragmatic way down into small-scale projects, and we'll implement this as and when we have the money over the next 25 years. And 25 years is fine, as cities go. If in 25 years we've completed this green network and built spaces like this on the River Lee, or spaces like this in the Rainham Marshes, one of the great bird and wildlife centres on the lower Thames, then that's not much time in terms of rebuilding the city. And linked with this, we're beginning to rethink our waste strategies, how we work to refit our existing building stock, whether it be residential or commercial, and how we dispose and reuse our waste products in London. And this is an emerging idea, still very much at a concept, where we're now trying to put all of this thinking together. And we're asking this question about whether or not the future of the Thames Gateway, as London's growth area, should be around the green economy, around the environmental economy, linking research, green industries and green transport together into a new district for London. And overlaying that with plans we now have, which we're now commencing on site with, to lay new large-scale district heating and decentralised energy networks across East London to guide that development. And this is the point where I finish. But the interesting thing for us around designing cities now on a human scale, which have a future, which take on the challenges of the 21st century, is how we stitch together these various aspects. And we've called this the New Urban Agenda. This is London's agenda, about linking transport, housing, the uniqueness of space, regeneration, and environmental performance together. And if we can do that, I think we're doing something quite good in London. Thanks.
Merci Peter Bishop. Juste avant de sauter à Madrid, j'aurais une question parce que tout à l'heure Ricky Burdett a évoqué The Shard of Glass, qui est quand même une tour très emblématique pour l'Est de Londres, et emblématique au sens, non pas, je ne parle pas du signal urbain, mais de ce qu'elle porte, c'est-à-dire cette idée de mixité, c'est-à-dire une ville verticale, avec du logement, des bureaux, des commerces et une place publique à 100 mètres de haut. Qu'en est-il de ce projet? Se réalise-t-il malgré la crise? Et est-ce qu'il est le premier d'une chaîne sur la question de la mixité, des tours mixtes? On a, Jean Nouvel ici a gagné un grand concours à la Défense avec la tour Signal sur cette même idée de mixité, mais on voit donc que la tour est un objet j'allais dire, de travail, on le sait depuis très longtemps dans l'imaginaire des architectes, mais là prend une nouvelle forme, de nouvelles typologies émergent, et cette question de la mixité à l'échelle verticale, donc à la grande hauteur, on pourrait presque dire XXL, eh bien, est d'actualité. Qu'est-ce qu'il en est?
Well, specifically, as an answer to your question about the Shard, the Renzo piano building, which looks like a very tall pyramid, what I can confirm is that it is being built by a North London Jewish developer with backing from Qatar. So it's a very interesting global situation in and of itself. It is going to be occupied by Transport for London, so the mayor is paying rent. It is being occupied by a major hotel chain. So that building will be not a residential building. And actually I have to correct you, you said East London. It isn't East London, it's right in the middle of London. It's right in front of the city of London. It's in our mental map that it seems far away because it's on the wrong side of the river, so to speak. I think that's an important point for many of our cities. What we think is remote is actually very close. And it's a building which is going to be the highest in Europe for a short time, I'm sure, which only has 47 car parking spaces because it's right on top of a tube station. Now, that has stimulated a series of other projects by very well-known architects, Herzog de Meuron and others, for residential towers right next to it. These are not public yet, but there's an emerging discussion which links to the point I had made of bringing families back into the center to actually use the tower typology as a way of amplifying the density in many ways and also increasing the potential of living in the middle of the city. But there's an equation which is very important, which is density of building, and it doesn't need to be tall, needs to pay for other forms of infrastructure. We call it Section 106, it's a very technical term. But any development of that scale needs to, of course, pay back somehow. And I think one of the very important issues of these sorts of buildings is to provide public space of high quality and better schools. And I think you mustn't think of these buildings on their own, because I don't think that will solve the problem of London or any other city.
Merci pour cette précision.